My name is Mary Sui Yee Wong. I am a visual artist who is based in Montreal, Quebec, and I predominantly work with sculpture, installation, and performance work. It took a little bit for us to come to the title for the show, I have to say, because I'm actually really shy, and knowing that I'm going to be profiled in any way, I wasn't even going to put a label on it. But we bantered around a few things, and at one point, I was interested in talking about my interest in being resilient as an artist, the longevity of a practice. But Zoe was the one sitting on the metro on her way to work at 8 o'clock. And so I came up with the word by nature, the second part by nature, and then she came up with the first part, restless, because that's in a way how she does. So the exhibition is called Restless by Nature, Mary Sui Yee Wong, 1990 to present, which kind of represents the whole scope of my art. And I feel really delighted and fortunate to have the opportunity to work with the curator Zoe Chan, who I've had a long working history with. So knowing the fact that my work is often site-specific in almost every single case, each of the art pieces, installation or performance work, is produced specifically for a location, indoor or outdoor, public or otherwise. Thinking about putting all of the collection of these works in this physical space meant that I had to be very careful and not worry about chronologically presenting the work, from 1990 to present, but mainly relying on the materiality and the tiny threads between each of the pieces, whether it's about the use of color in the fabrics or in the light bulbs or in the dyed rice, or in the references, to culture versus nature, like this, Bienvenue and Nature Morte and Cultivating the Land, that's in Gallery 3. It was really like me having the opportunity to visit the gallery in advance and really sit in the space and then think carefully what would work mostly. And I guess because I'm so used to working site-specific, I can predict and reimagine, what the spaces would look like and how the work would exist side by side. And I'm so grateful it actually turned out. Yeah, but it was still a bit of a challenge. Yeah. I think my process is very organic in a sense, but at the same time, it's not something that I sit down at a drawing table or like a writer and just start writing based on something specific. Often it comes from a culmination of reactions and responses, observations that I've made over time even, and being introspective at different moments, thinking about histories and my memories when I sit down and say, I have a gallery that I want to exhibit in. I'm looking at the time and place of that particular moment in my life and also in the world around me, what's happening. And what are the things that I think, the kind of creative expressions that's lacking in a way, whether it's through materiality or through the theory or through the formal qualities of the work. So I often kind of reflect on those things, but one of the driving forces between my work is always remembering that if I work from the personal, first and foremost, and then I try to kind of move the work and evolve it as I'm producing it so that it can be a bit more open-ended and raise questions so that others can view the work and bring their own readings to it. That's kind of my process. And then the other aspect is the materiality. I'm really very true to the fact that I feel all materials and all objects, in keeping with Western theory, are signifiers. They have their own meaning embedded in them, like a book or a grain of rice, a piece of paper. And there's historical and cultural and social meanings. And so I draw on those multiplicities of readings, and then I play with that so that I'm able to avoid a singular kind of reading or experience that I'm trying to communicate. I don't want to make statements. I want to just pique curiosity, get people to raise questions, and hopefully incite some reflections of their own. One really interesting common theme, and even though I didn't think about it. When I first started making art, even here at Emily Carr, when I was going to the foundation program and doing art classes, and I thought very carefully about how could I use materials and use form and function to articulate cultural specificity. And the first thing I started to do was I started painting rice grains. I thought if I had a grain of rice that was white and I painted it gold, it became something. It wasn't just a rice grain anymore. Or I painted it bronze, it was bronze gold. And so I did one of my first installations with rice was that I just simply did that. By changing the surface of a material, it changed the meaning and allowed it to have multiple kind of readings. And so I carried that throughout most of the work. I look for ways to kind of take something that has its own inherent kind of signifier, try to transform it in such a way that it can then embrace multiple kind of options or symbolisms. And then I actually then reinvest it through the installation or through performance or through form, by making sculptures that then shift it. I do think that I draw a lot from theatricality, how objects are used on stage sets. Whenever you go into theater, you can go into a play and you can see a chair and a table, in Chinese opera specifically, and that chair and the table will function as that. And then in the next scene, it becomes a stair. And then the third scene, it's actually the bedroom. So those are the kinds of influences that I try to consider, or options with the material. I was really chastised when I was in the undergrad program for working with materials and also the use of the Chinese language in my art, because it was then, quote unquote, not accessible to a regular audience, whatever that meant. And so in school, I thought, well, I had to find a way to defend that. But at the same, and it was really in the early 80s or mid 80s when identity politics was still just kind of like in the foray, not totally taken on hold yet. And I had to assert that in the end, if I'm working with the true art theory of sculpture, form, and function, it doesn't matter if I'm using language, because as long as formally, like visually, you can still walk away and gain something from it, just like abstract and conceptual art, right? You will have, a sort of had some kind of experience. So I felt that even though using Chinese characters specifically in my work might seem like I'm isolating or alienating a particular audience, I think visually it's still captivating enough to make them want to know. And that's actually what I do want. I want to invite an audience to kind of have some curiosity about the culture that I'm coming from and that I'm speaking for. And if you didn't know these words, maybe it'll invite you to look them up and then learn something. The one thing I do want to say is that, as a senior artist who has, had a few decades of material making, and having seen a lot of young and emerging artists kind of rise up now in the fore, who are also really interested in identity formation in their work, I am curious to know from that particular audience, and also contemporary, Asian diasporic, audiences who may not have experienced the discrimination necessarily or the racism that I experienced when I was an early adolescent growing up in North America, whether or not this work still resonates and communicates with them, whether they see it as hypercritical or not honoring the host country that, because that's a curiosity for me. I think that I'm hoping that this work will raise some of those questions and also bring some of those conversations to me, because it'll help feed me as I go forward to make other work.